Okay, so picture this. It's 1917. The Romanov dynasty, a family that had ruled Russia for more than 300 years, just ends. Suddenly, dramatically. An entire empire, one of the biggest on the planet, just completely collapses into revolution, civil war, and then the birth of something totally new and radical.
So, how on earth does that happen? I mean, how does an institution that's been around for centuries, with this massive army and a secret police force, just disintegrate? That's the huge question we're going to tackle right now.
Well, the best way to get your head around this massive event is to think of Russia at the time like a giant pressure cooker. For decades, all these social, political, and economic pressures were just building up and building up, with absolutely no way to let off steam. So let's take a look at what exactly was heating things up inside that cooker. All right, first things first, let's look at the container itself. The Russian Empire. It was absolutely massive, sure, but it was also incredibly fragile. Running the show was Tsar Nicholas II, and this guy was a full-on autocrat. He genuinely believed he had a divine right from God to rule, which, was a system totally out of sync with the modern world. His government? Super inefficient. It was staffed by the rich and powerful, not necessarily the best and brightest. This whole rigid structure was just not designed to handle the kind of pressure that was about to be thrown at it. Okay, so now let's start adding the main ingredients to our pressure cooker, and that's the deep, deep frustrations of the Russian people. So take a look at these numbers, because this is huge. A whopping 80% of the Russian population were farmers, peasants. Just think about that for a second. In places like France and Germany, it was more like 40 or 50%. This means that if the peasants had a problem, the entire nation had a problem. And oh boy, did they have problems. And this really breaks down the two main sources of that pressure, from the ground up. On one hand, you've got millions of peasants. Yeah, serfdom was technically over, but they were still trapped in poverty, paying these insane fees for tiny little plots of land, while the nobility owned these massive estates. And then, at the same time, you've got this new working class in the cities, living in just terrible conditions, no political rights, working 12, even 15-hour days for practically nothing. So with all this suffering, you can bet different ideas for the future were bubbling up. On one side, you had the liberals. They were a bit more moderate, wanting a system kind of like Britain's, but, and this is a big but, they only wanted wealthy men with property to have the right to vote. Then, on the other side, you had the radicals. They wanted to tear the whole thing down. They were demanding no special treatment for anyone, voting rights for everybody, including women, and a complete reshuffling of all the wealth. These two totally different visions just added another layer of tension to the mix. Now, there was one attempt to create a release valve for all this pressure, the Duma. After a revolution failed back in 1905, the Tsar was basically forced to create this elected parliament. But honestly, it was a total sham. He got rid of the first one after just 75 days and then made sure any future ones were packed with his buddies. So instead of letting off steam, this powerless Duma just made everyone even more angry with the Tsar. So, okay, the pressure is already at a boiling point. And then, the one single event happens that cranks the heat all the way to max and seals the empire's fate for good. World War I. Just let this number sink in for a second. 7 million. By 1917, that's how many Russian soldiers were casualties of the war. Killed, wounded, or captured. It's a scale of human loss that's it's almost impossible to even wrap your head around. It was a national trauma on a country that was already at its breaking point. And what's really key here is just how fast everything fell apart. I mean, in 1914, there was this big wave of patriotism, everyone rallying around the Tsar. But just 2 years later, after one horrible defeat after another and all those casualties, that support was just gone. The war basically put a giant spotlight on how incompetent the Tsar's government really was. And the disaster wasn't just happening out on the battlefield. As the army retreated, they destroyed everything, creating millions of refugees inside their own country. Back home, the economy was in a free fall. And the Tsarina, the empress, who was German-born, became this huge target for public anger. The war didn't just break the Russian army, it broke Russian society. So by the winter of 1917, that pressure cooker we talked about, it was whistling like crazy, shaking on the stove and about to blow its lid. All it needed was one final push. And when the final collapse came, it happened with mind-blowing speed. In just 5 days, the whole system just came crashing down. It all started with some worker strikes. But the real turning point, the moment everything changed, was when the government ordered soldiers to fire on the protesters. And the soldiers refused. They actually joined the revolution. That was it. Game over. With the military gone, the Tsar's own generals told him it was time to step down. So as the old government was crumbling, something new started to pop up, right from the streets. They were called Soviets, and these were basically councils made up of striking workers and soldiers. They became the real power, the real voice of the revolution, and they were a direct challenge to the weak temporary government that was trying to take over. And right into the middle of all this chaos steps this guy, Vladimir Lenin. He's the leader of this really radical group called the Bolsheviks. He comes back from exile with this incredibly simple but powerful set of promises. It all came down to 3 words: peace, land, and bread. I mean, think about it. For a country full of exhausted soldiers, peasants with no land, and workers who were starving, that message was impossible to ignore. And that's why, even though the February Revolution got rid of the Tsar, it was the Second Revolution in October that really changed everything. That's when Lenin and his Bolsheviks seized power for themselves, promising to make good on their slogan and build a brand new kind of world. So, what did this new world, the world's very first communist state, actually look like? The changes were fast, and they were huge. I mean, they nationalized almost all the industries and banks. They declared all land to be social property, basically telling peasants, go ahead, take the land from the nobles. In the cities, they took big houses and split them up for different families to live in. They even banned all the old aristocratic titles. Russia was being completely rebuilt from the ground up as a one-party state, run by the newly named Russian Communist Party. And make no mistake, this revolution wasn't just about Russia. Its shockwaves were felt all over the world. Suddenly, you had communist parties forming in places like Great Britain. The Bolsheviks were actively telling people in colonized nations to follow their lead and rise up. They even founded something called the Comintern to unite all these new parties. By the time World War II rolled around, the USSR had given socialism a global face. So here's the bottom line. The Russian Revolution wasn't just about one king falling off his throne. It was that final, massive explosion of the pressure cooker. It shattered an old world and created a brand new one, with all the good and the bad that came with it. It held out this incredible promise of equality and justice for all, but as we all know now, that promise would come at a truly staggering and often brutal cost.